Hey everybody, welcome to the session. I'm just going to give it a few seconds for people to turn up. Welcome to a rather gloomy afternoon here. Slightly cold, so I hope everyone's got their jumpers ready. I'll give it a few seconds just for everybody to come in and connect to sound, and then we'll get started on the webinar around travel. Brilliant. Right, without further ado, so welcome to this session on kind of steps to net zero. And what we're doing in these sessions is with myself, Adam Bastock. I'm the founder of Small 99. We do a lot of guidance and support on emissions and reduction targets around net zero specifically. We've been brought in this kind of 5-part series. Really is all about kind of the different areas of your emissions in a business. So last month, it probably was about 3-4 weeks ago now, the time has flown, we looked at engagement and really how do you engage your core teams. Today we're looking at travel and transport, which is typically quite a big part of emissions which are hidden, and we'll come on to some data later on to explore that in more detail. Please do, if you've got a pen and paper to hand, pencil out these notes in your diary. So 23rd of January, because we're taking a break for Christmas, we've got waste and reuse, energy and buildings on the 20th of February, and then finishing on a really big topic, which is supply chain, buying and selling in March. Just in terms of some housekeeping, so we have got closed captions are available if you would like to use them. If you open the Zoom bar, you should be able to select that option. Please do, where possible, use the Q&A facility for any questions that are coming in, and then you can upvote and comment on questions that you would like. It just makes my life much easier at seeing which ones we want to tackle first and getting some priority there. Any kind of slides or any questions that we don't get to, we will be emailed out kind of in the next few days. So I will make a note and be able to answer those and provide a bit of text, and that will be sent out in the next few days along with the slides. And again, please do use the chat function. But if you've got any abuse, please don't throw it at me just yet. In terms of what we're going to be doing today, so I'm going to kick off the session for 10 minutes or so, just with a bit of an introduction around what emissions look like in an organization, or specifically around net zero. So how do you start to measure those emissions and quantify them? Got the lovely Valentin here as well from Cycling Scotland, who will be giving some more tips. Do you want to give a few words, just quickly, Valentin, to say hello?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, folks. Very pleased to be here. So my name is Valentin. I work for Cycling Scotland. We're the national cycling organisation. We run a number of programs, including a program called Cycling Friendly, that is designed to make it easier for employers, for schools, for universities, colleges, for local authorities to make it easier for their stakeholders to cycle. So I'll be talking a little bit more about this, but more than anything today, I'll be representing the whole active travel sector, and I'll be telling you about all the opportunities that the sector can offer.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, really excited to see, because Valentin's presentation's got some great details of where we can get started, and some of the more practical tips of that. And then we'll be coming to Joe to hear about sort of the journey engagement there. I've just noticed, Poppy, you've got your hand up. I'm just going to allow you to talk briefly and just see what your challenges are. Okay, I'm assuming that might be a mistake on terms of the raising a hand there, Poppy. So I'm just going to remove that from you. Cool. If you do have any issues, do pop it into the chat or raise your hand again, and I'll come to you. We'll try to finish off with kind of 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A towards the end as well. Just very quickly, I wanted to get a bit of a sense for the room, because we can't hear from everybody this morning, or this afternoon, sorry. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop a link into chat for Mentimeter. I just want to really understand what everyone is doing currently around communications around kind of communicating their transport journey. How are you getting to work? How are your staff getting to work currently? So we've got 2 questions. The first of which is, how do you currently travel to work? And then the second question will be, how would you like to get to work? So in theory, if this tech goes well, which includes a little bit of jumping around for me, the graph is activated, which is always good. You can see things moving around. So just a very quick feel for what we're seeing in the room at the minute. That's good. Public transport winning out already. This is always nice to see. No cycling. You've got some some converting to do here, Valentin. That's brilliant. Car, bus, train, walk. Please do pop, if it is other, pop it in the chat as well, because I appreciate that I may have not got all the options here. I'm just going to move on to the next slide now, which is bearing that in mind, how would you like to travel to work? Because this is often something that we see is missed from surveys or missed from engagement, is that we're not always asking how people would like to get to work. So any thoughts or considerations on if that's different to how you're currently? Thanks, Naomi. I was thinking of putting ferry on there because I thought I might have missed that one off. Oh, brilliant, Gazelle. It's amazing. Cycling. Yeah, so I think cycling to the station sounds a lot easier than cycling to Stirling from Glasgow. Possible, but perhaps not ideal for a morning commute. Interesting. So most people would like to walk. I always find it interesting that no one here has put that they'd like to drive to work. And I think that's the thing here is that, how do we change our infrastructure to move away from car dependency, because it's not always the most pleasant to be stuck in traffic, let alone anything else. Brilliant. I'm just going to swap back my screens now. I'll share those results as well later, and they can kind of go out in the follow-up emails as well. So you've got that information there. Let me come to the webinar. Back over there. Cool. So what I want to do now is just run through some of the examples of commuting emissions very quickly of how you actually start quantifying this impact, because already we've seen that we've got a lot of people who may be traveling by bus, maybe traveling by car, people traveling by ferry. Well, actually, how do we start quantifying that data in terms of our carbon footprint to understand what the emissions from commuting look like? I think with transport, it is more difficult than some of the other areas of carbon emissions. And therefore, really wanted to just walk you through what this looks like. And bear in mind, this might be for either your customers, your staff, volunteers, yourself. It can be really anyone. And so if you think of something like a school, well, they're going to have the staff driving to work, but they're also going to have all of their parents who might be dropping kids off. And there's going to be two different ways of two different sets of emissions that we want to start to quantify. The three pieces of information you need for calculating this data: firstly, distance, so the amount of miles traveled. The UK average, so this might not be relevant necessarily for some of the Highlands of Scotland, thinking of that ferry situation, is 8 miles per day is the average amount of distance that a journey is in the UK. So it's not necessarily as far as people might think. Frequency is around how many days a week are you doing that trip. Especially since COVID, we've seen hybrid working come a lot more, and therefore it might be most people are only traveling 2 or 3 days to the office rather than a full 5. And then finally, we've got the method and the vehicle. And that's really important to get accuracy on that. And we'll come to an example later to explain why that is. There's two ways of gathering this data. The firstly is going to be an internal travel survey, so asking questions very similar to what I just saw, but also an aspirational one. And I think it's really important to ask people how they want to get to work, because it might be that there's elements that are being missed here. One example just for myself is a friend who works at a hospital, and she drives to work every day, but really wants to cycle. Well, actually, she can't because there's no cycle storage at that destination. So the hospital doesn't have anything there where she can actually store a bike. So ignoring the infrastructure between in terms of cycle lanes, she can't actually kind of secure the bike at the other end. And Valentin will be talking more about that later, I'm sure. So in terms of how we actually calculate and quantify this, we've got to find, firstly, let's say Sam is going to work. We've got to find out their commuting data. So what's the distance, from home to that place of work? And let's say it's 10 miles a day to make the maths easy. We might then look at, well, how many days a week are they in? That might be 3 days a week. And they'll probably be doing that in a Nissan Leaf, say. So let's say they've gone to an electric vehicle. Well, that Nissan Leaf is then going to have a certain set of emissions for it that are taken from the UK government figures. And in this case, it's 0.08 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per mile. Now, the question there is often, why does that Nissan Leaf have emissions in the first place? And I think it's important to start thinking of this at a bigger chain, and this is why carbon emissions can get quite complicated. Around 40% of all emissions from the shipping industry are just from transporting fossil fuels alone. And that's a really good indication that there is this entire supply chain that we often don't think about or even quantify when we're coming to calculate these emissions, but thankfully the government figures do. So all vehicles do have emissions factors which the government provide, and there's this well to tank figure, which is really key. So if we even look at a petrol car, that will have different figures from the government than from maybe what's on the label at the, so I could say the supermarket, but at the car showroom, where it will say X number of grams per mile on there. That's going to be a much lower figure than what the government quotes, because the government looks at the full supply chain. Because those fossil fuels need extracting, refining, and transporting kind of out of that oil well onto a container ship to a refinery, from the refinery to a petrol station for you to then drive up and refill your car. And that is coming from the oil well to your petrol tank, essentially. Exactly the same is happening with electricity, where electricity is often generated from gas. Scotland is slightly different in this, but unfortunately the figures are kind of UK-wide, where around 40% of the UK's electricity comes from burning gas. Around 40% of the UK's electricity comes from wind power. That's going to be changing over the next few years still, and the electricity figures will start to decrease, but we still have to take into account that right now there is some kind of emissions there. If you do have solar panels, this is the benefit, is that you might have on your home a solar panel that is then basically powering your electric car immediately. That means that your emissions could be zeroed down and actually be incredibly low. So you might want to measure yourself slightly differently for that than if you were taking some averages. When it comes to calculating those emissions, so we need to take the amount of miles being done per day and times that by the days a week. So 10 miles, 3 days a week is 30 miles. Working kind of the average 48 weeks a year gets us to around 1,440 miles a year. And so we times that by the emissions factor, which on the Nissan Leaf is 0.08 kilos, and that gets us a figure of 113 kilos. I hope you're in the mood for numbers. This is probably the most number-heavy slide, but apologies if you're not. So we've now got the figure for one employee with one electric vehicle that comes to 113 kilos a year. And as we mentioned before, that employee, you might take that out. That might be volunteer, might be staff, might be visitor, as well. If we look at something like a petrol vehicle, so a Ford Focus, well, that kind of figure is around 276 kilos. So again, we want to do some math there to times that accordingly, and that comes out at 314 kilos. To put that in context, because I think it can be quite hard with these figures to really understand what these figures mean, 314 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent is about the same as spending £550 on electricity. So just to put it in context there. Someone said they can't see the screen. I'm just going to stop sharing and then see if resharing fixes it for you, Ian. Valentin, can I just check with you? Can you see the screen? Yeah, okay. I'm just going to say something.
However, I can't seem to be able to put a question in the Q&A.
That might be why it's quite quiet. Hannah, I'll see if you can, it might be there's permissions on the Q&A chat that might be blocking it. Cool, I'll carry on while tech issues are kind of gremlins are sorted in the background. Just trying to look at this in context for an entire organization. So again, just thinking of the scale here, and again, we're choosing employees, but feel free to swap that out for visitors if that's more appropriate. If you've got 20 employees or visitors that are doing the same trip 3 days a week, and that's 5 miles one way, we can see over a year, this starts adding up very quickly to many tons of carbon dioxide. So on the right-hand side here, we've got a large petrol car. So if you're driving something like a Range Rover, well, that's nearly 13 tons of emissions in total. If you start looking at something much smaller, so like an electric car or even a small petrol car, that's actually only 7 tons. So thinking of a Range Rover versus that Ford Focus, you can start to almost halve your emissions just by driving slightly smaller cars. And then if you go from a petrol car down to something like an electric powered car, Again, that's a fairly hefty reduction. I can't do maths this quickly, but probably a 60 to 70% reduction. But don't quote me on that because I'm doing it live. And then if you go from an electric car to something like an e-bike, well, actually, that is a 90% reduction again. So we start to see these different elements of transport becoming really kind of the impact of different transport types can be considerable over the size of an organization, especially this is only 20 people. If you do think of something like a school or a wedding venue or like a campsite, well, actually, people who have got a lot of visitor travel there, that's going to add up to a lot of emissions over a year. The one frustration I have with the government figures is there is not one for an electric bus. So we're expecting that to be released next year, but based on some estimates that we've made, it's also going to sit about there. So again, we see public transport being a really efficient way to move people around and therefore much lower emissions. So when we're thinking about transport, we do need to think about kind of public and private transport. The reason for that is this sort of diagram, which is I've shamelessly taken from a YouTube video, which I'm happy to send the link around for, because I think it's a really good demonstration of the challenges here about thinking not just about emissions, but also thinking about the amount of space different things take up. If you are in the Highlands, then a car is fantastic and it's going to be really perfect for getting around. It's going to do everything you need to in a way that a tram won't. However, if you are traveling from kind of across Glasgow or Edinburgh or the Central Belt, where it's more densely populated, that's going to take up so much space that we actually start to see that something like cycle storage or petitioning local authorities for better kind of bus transport, tram transport, or even walking facilities, and redesigning our cities so that it's more people orientated is going to be a much better use of resource and space. And we need to be mindful of the amount of space that this transport is all taking up. Even electric vehicles or even autonomous electric vehicles are still going to take up a lot more room than something like a tram system would do. What I want to do now is just take a quick look at our scorecard. So we've been running this over the past, I think about 6 months now, where you do get some personalized recommendations for yourself and for your own organization of what you can do to reduce your footprint and start moving towards net zero. But it also gives us insight into the industry and some of those barriers. We've had around 270 completions since March, so just over 6 months, and there should be a link being pinned into the chat magically for yourself if you haven't already completed this. There we go. Thank you very much. But I wanted to just walk through some of the insights we've seen from this so far to give you an idea of what's going on in the industry. If we look at across all of the results we've had, around 50% of those total respondents are in the Central Belt, so Glasgow, Edinburgh, South Lanarkshire. And then we do see that there's a good spread from around the rest of the country as well, but that typically is the other kind of 50%. So just bear that in mind when we're talking about it, and apologies, I've forgotten the name now. Is it Naomi? Okay, if you are based on the islands, then some of these insights aren't going to be applicable to you, but as a broad kind of assessment, I think it's a really interesting mix here. So for example, do you have a no-fly organizational travel policy for domestic trips? Again, if you do living on an island, it might be that flights are a necessary way of life. However, bearing in mind that half of our respondents are in the Central Belt, we're still seeing that 41% of people are saying that that's not applicable, or that 35% have got no policy in place. And that 35% is a real concern for me, in that if they're flying to London for work, that's going to generate quite a lot of emissions. So one return flight from Glasgow to London is around 360 kilos of CO2 there. And that's for one person. So if you're doing a team trip down, that can kind of very quickly stack up. It is important to bear in mind in the context of that. But again, we're starting to see that still a surprising amount might be flying for that. In terms of commuting, so do staff and volunteers mostly commute to work by car? Well, actually, we see that the car really wins there. 53% of people are kind of commuting by car. Thinking back to the very small sample we had this morning, where there was 3 people that said that they do commute by car, but none of them actually picked. They actually wanted to do that. Well, we need to start looking at how we can address that and doing those, what's the word, aspirational surveys. 36% saying no. I thought was quite a big surprise there. That's quite a lot of people that may not be driving, but even that issue is, that kind of higher carbon, even electric vehicles are higher carbon than public transport per mile, and therefore we do want to start shifting away from that. So again, just putting that in context here, where train and tram are much lower than on the electric car, and that's only going to get better as we electrify more of our tram and train networks. Using your influence, I think, is really a key thing here as well. So have you campaigned to improve public transport and walking, wheeling and cycling to your spaces? So bearing in mind on this one, we're saying that, well, actually, we know that public transport is much lower carbon. Well, the answer there is the infrastructure might not exist. Fair enough. Well, let's do something about it. Let's use that voice as an organisation to try and support more. Nearly 60% of people are saying that they're not doing that. And I think that's a really, not shocking, but I think an important thing to take away from this, and that we need to be doing more as an industry to influence and to provide support for those projects where possible. I think Get Glasgow moving, and there's been a lot of work in Glasgow just because that's where I'm based around this, and certainly the Clyde Metro project's got a lot of attention. But again, we might need to do more work on supporting something like that to make sure that it's actually come to fruition and that we are the change we want to see. Cycle to work schemes, and again, Valentin will come to more of this later, but 63% saying that they do not offer a cycle to work scheme, which was again a real surprise. I think cycle to work schemes are fairly well bedded in. They've been around for quite a while. They're fairly simple now in terms of getting them set up, but a lot of people aren't doing it. So again, if you're not doing that in the organization, why is that? Maybe there's valid reasons why not, but hopefully Valentin can inspire you in the next session to kind of explore some options for overcoming on that. And 8% saying maybe, so there might be some uncertainty there that we still need to address. But yeah, quite a shocking result there. Again, going back to bike storage, I think this is a key one, is that while 49% do say they offer on-site bike storage, which is fantastic, we've got 38% that are saying no. And I think if you're comparing that to the previous one, we've got 63% of the industry saying they don't have a secure cycle to work scheme, but then 50% are saying that they do have on-site bike storage. Well, there's a disconnect there. If there's bike storage that's being there, is it actually being used? Do people know about it? Do people know about the cycle scheme? So I think there's a challenge here about making sure we're aligning. And also just challenging that assumption as well, is that most places will have secure car storage. They will have a car park where you can leave a car that's not on the street necessarily. So again, just thinking about how we're thinking about that use of public space. In terms of EV charging as well, which I thought was an interesting one, not too surprising that 68% are saying they don't have EV charging. There might be many barriers to that around landlords and implementation. But again, we do find that there are a lot of grants, especially in Scotland, available for this. And you can get, I think it's up to 75% of that funded. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that later, but we'll dig out the stats. And I think EV charging is going to be part of that systems change, especially on areas that are more remote. Well, actually, electric vehicles can still do a few hundred miles now, even the lower ranges that are coming through. And therefore, it's quite a good kind of solution for those areas where public transport isn't possible. Cool. That's it from me. Any questions, please do pop into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll be coming back later. But for now, I will hand over to Valentin.
Thank you very much, Adam. That was very comprehensive. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen. Please confirm that you can see it. Right. I'm starting at the end here. Yep. Can everyone see my screen?
It's come through for me. Perfect.
Fantastic. Yeah. Hi, everyone. As I said earlier, my name is Valentin. I work at Cycling Scotland. We're the national cycling organisation. We run a range of programs, including one I'm going to be talking about in particular detail today, called the Cycling Friendly Program. But for those of you who either are young enough or who have children in school, or even if you have relatives in school, you may have heard of the Bikeability Program. So Cycling Scotland runs the Bikeability Scotland program, or at least coordinates it at national level, amongst other things. So, I mean, as Adam said earlier in his presentation, there are quite a lot of people who do actually want to take steps to reduce their carbon emission, and quite a lot of organisations who are already offering a number of either facilities or services to help encourage this. However, there is still a fair gap to bridge there. So we're going to be talking about this in a bit more detail here. Now, in terms of Cycling Scotland, in a bit more detail, our vision is to create a sustainable, inclusive, and healthy Scotland where anyone, anywhere can enjoy all the benefits of cycling. But essentially what we do is that we tend to work with others rather than actually delivering on the ground. So we are a funder, we're an enabler, but that's very much at the heart of what we do, is working in partnership with other people. Now, I do have a few questions to ask you first. According to you guys, what do you think are the benefits of cycling? So if you can pop that those answers in the chat, that would be great. Exercise, yes, absolutely. Physical health and well-being, yes, absolutely. Mental health, yes. Productivity, more energized when you arrive, totally. No one ever looks miserable on a bike, that is true. Cost saving, quicker. My God, you are really on fire. That is fantastic. Connection with nature, the outdoor, engagement with surroundings, reduce congestion. But I think you've definitely made the list here. We have so much to gain from cycling on a regular basis, even if it's for a short distance. What is really interesting is one of the stats that Adam mentioned earlier, is that the average journey there and back to work is around 8 miles. So that's 4 miles, and for 50% of those journeys, you'll have journeys that are less than 3 miles. So if you actually look at the median distance, it's even lower than that. And so what that means is that whilst, as we know so far, the majority of people will, I mean, at least based on the stats that we saw from Adam, the majority will rely on car travel to get to and from work. But because of the distances that most of us travel to work, there is real scope to take up cycling or walking to work. There's obviously another very good reason to start cycling to work, and for you as an employer to encourage your colleagues to do so, is environmental reasons, and it's an excellent way to reduce your carbon footprint. So this is an older version of the diagram that Adam showed earlier, but essentially, the use of space in busy, congested urban areas has also quite a lot to do with the reasons to encourage cycling and walking as modes of transport. So now, we do know that cycling is a really good thing to do and to encourage people to do as a workplace. However, there are a number of barriers that we know need to be broken down. Can anyone tell me or think of any barriers to cycling? We mentioned cycle parking earlier today. Anything else? Distance and time, yeah, that's a really good one. Initial cost, yes, absolutely. Weather, safety, confidence, lack of infrastructure, not confident with a cycle lane. Physical ability, absolutely. Road safety awareness. I suppose that could be from both sides there as well. The money for weather appropriate clothes and a decent bike, fear of the roads, absolutely, Margot. Yeah. Anyone else? I think we've covered quite a lot here. Lack of access to bikes, that's a really good one. Absolutely. Interestingly, when you look at the stats in urban areas such as Glasgow City Council, you realise that it's over 40% of households, not people, but households, who do not have access to a car at all. And usually you will see that there is a correlation between that and the distance that people live in from their workplace. So access to bikes is a big problem. Lack of storage or cycle parking is a big problem. Lack of confidence and role model is one that we hear quite a lot. Lack of suitable infrastructure is a massive factor. Too many cars on the road. Again, this is very much linked to the lack of suitable infrastructure and the fear of the roads. But there are plenty of other barriers that need to be broken down. The lack of physical ability could be one as well. And there are many other barriers that can be broken down. That being said, there are a wide number of organisations now who are funded by Transport Scotland and who also work with local authorities and third sector organisations like yourself, who do support workplaces, community groups, universities and colleges, public, third sector and private sector organisations to make it easier for folks to cycle. We're one of those organisations. We're part of a body of 6 active travel organisations funded by Transport Scotland, and that includes Cycling UK, Pass for All, Living Streets, Energy Savings Trust, and Sustrans Scotland. But you'll find that in what we'll talk about in a wee while, you might also be able to get support from a number of other types of organisations. Maybe regional transport partnerships, your local authorities. Some local authorities will have specific funds to encourage cycling, but also there will be a really good recipient of anyone voicing the need for improved infrastructure. Third sector delivery organisations such as bike reuse organisations. We're going to be talking about Bike for Good, and Joe in particular will be talking about one of the programmes that they launched earlier this year called Switch Up. The bike station is an example in Edinburgh, but there are many other examples such as Adventure Aberdeen up north, the Bikery in Huntly, Velocity Cafe and Bicycle Workshop up in Inverness. All those organisations work towards the same goal, which is to make it easier for people to use bike as a form of transport. So what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you about the cycling friendly programme in a little bit more detail. So the programme is funded by Transport Scotland. It's run by Cycling Scotland. And what we do is that we will essentially go into the workplace or go into the community group or go into the university, and we will do something very similar to what Adam described in his presentation earlier. We'll have a look at what it is that you're already doing, and we'll have a look at what it is that could be improved. So it's very much a consultancy and hand-holding support service, if you like. It's all free and it's all funded. But what we do is that we look at specific criteria groups. So we'll look at facilities, we'll look at organizational policies, and we'll look at communication and promotion. So effectively, that is a support scheme that you can tap into, and you can get that support in order to become a cycling-friendly workplace or a cycling-friendly community. Now, in going into a bit more detail, what is it that you can do as a workplace to make it easier for staff to cycle? I mean, we've talked about the barriers. Now it's about how we address them. Cycle parking, the stat that Adam mentioned earlier, 49% of workplaces said in the survey that it didn't provide. Sorry, was it 49% who did provide who did provide cycle parking? My mistake. But the fact is that a lot of workplaces will not or do not currently provide cycle parking. This could be for lack of space. This could be due to lack of resources. And what is important to say as well is that the quality of the cycle parking facility and the level of security that it provides will have also a big impact in encouraging people to cycle. What that means is that you may end up in a situation where you do have a cycle parking provided by your workplace, but the fact is it will not necessarily be suitable or safe enough to lock your bike. Now, you want to make sure that it's well lit. You want to make sure that it's safe, it's conveniently located, that people are effectively happy to use it and comfortable using it. Another thing that you can consider doing as well as a workplace is that you can consider making your changing areas or providing a changing area in the first place, but also making sure that it is agreeable to use, nice to use, having mirrors, hair dryers, potentially some drying accessories, depending on the number of employees that you have, depending on the layout of your office, having some lockers for people to store their belongings as well. It is worth noting that for the majority of cycle journeys, particularly commuting journeys that are under 3 miles, the need to have a shower and change will be greatly reduced, and particularly as you become more and more used to taking that journey by bike. So your showering facilities are certainly a plus if you can provide that, but equally that's not necessarily something that we will focus on disproportionately as part of the cycling friendly support scheme. But what is really important to say is that funding can be a barrier for workplaces to be able to provide those facilities, and there are funds that are available from Cycling Scotland to be able to access to be able to develop cycle parking facilities, cycle storage facilities for those who need to store their bikes securely overnight, and changing facilities as well. And on that note, Adam, I will be keen to hear about your friend who works for the NHS and is not able to store their bike, because we'll be more than happy to have a chat with them. Other small things that you can do to support as well. It's not just about the big actions such as cycle parking and changing facilities. Even having a basic toolkit with a few spares that people can access in case they have a puncture on their way to work. Even though, with quality tires, this is something that seldom happens these days. But small things like this, and also making sure that people feel empowered and have the right level of skill to be able to mend a small mechanical issue on their bike as they get to work. Having an emergency lock, similarly, if someone loses their keys or forgets their bicycle lock at home, having the assurance that they have a spare one at work that they can use is certainly a small thing that you can do, but that would work well. The cycle to work scheme is another thing that we look at, and one thing that is particularly important if you are going to set up a cycle to work scheme, which we certainly encourage. We provide a link with a guidance here. The presentation will be shared, so I would certainly encourage you to look into it and also to sign up to the award program so that you can have a cycling friendly visit to your workplace. But first and foremost, once you've set up your cycle to work scheme, what we recommend is to make sure that the limit is over £1,000. There used to be a limit to £1,000 historically, but that was lifted by HMRC back in 2019. And what that means is that now the majority of people who do apply to the cycle to work scheme will be able to purchase e-bikes as well on the scheme. For those of you who don't know how it works, essentially the way it works is that it allows the employer to purchase the bike on behalf of the employee and then take monthly payments off the employee's salary, therefore reducing the amount of income tax that they have to pay at the end of the year. And so what that means, however, is that for anyone who is on a low income, if you do not meet a certain tax threshold, you are ineligible to take part in the cycle to work scheme. And this is why we feel it's very important to also signpost to alternatives. And we talked about bike recycling organizations earlier today. And so that's why we think it's really important to signpost to those alternatives for people who are excluded from taking part in the cycle to work scheme, either for salary reasons or for contractual reasons. So if you have been employed for less than 6 months, or if you're on a 0-hour contract, or if you are a contractor, you cannot access this opportunity. Another thing that you can do as workplaces to make bikes available for staff. And we mentioned that the lack of access to a bike and the initial cost to take up cycling can be perceived as a barrier, and can be not only perceived but be a barrier. So we work with a lot of workplaces who have bought a small fleet of bikes, 2-3 bikes, depending on the size of the organization, and who have made those bikes available both for staff to borrow as a commuting trial, but also for work journeys. And what you can do is you can also very much signal to your staff that you are comfortable with them using bikes for business journeys where this is applicable, where we're talking about business journeys that can reasonably be carried out by bike due to the distance, but offering bike mileage allowance for those business journeys, same as you would do for car mileage, is a good way to signal as well that you are supportive of bikes being used for business journeys. Now, in terms of opportunities in the sector, what you'll see, what I've done is that I've created some appendixes on the slides, and I've got a list of all the different funds and support programs that are available, but we don't have time to go into them today. However, I thought it would be really important to mention that one of our partner organizations, Energy Savings Trust, working in partnership with Home Energy Scotland, do provide some interest-free loans for people and businesses to purchase e-bikes and e-cargo bikes. But they also do provide e-bike trials, and those are available from Home Energy Scotland. You'll see in the appendices, you have the contact details for Home Energy Scotland if you'd like to have a free e-bike trial, either hosted by the workplace or for yourselves as individuals. Now, Nice. Oh, sorry, I see we've got a question here. Shona, what we'll do is that we'll take questions at the end if that's okay. Just to yeah, that's fine.
Just on the interest of time as well, it might be good to bring Jo in to speak about her kind of experience.
No problem. Yeah, that's
quickly.
fine. And so what I'll do is that I'll just very signpost you to a number of cycle training opportunities. We know that lack of confidence and fear of the road is a major barrier for people. So, you know, as an employer, we strongly encourage you to signpost to local training opportunities. You'll be able to find some here by clicking on the link. But, you know, we also have organizations who will have trained a member of staff who can then support people with cycle training. In terms of events promotion, you can do route planning, doctor bike sessions. Can again, you know, we were talking about bike maintenance knowledge being potentially a barrier. So similarly, running some basic bike maintenance training classes can be a way to encourage people to use bikes as a form of transport. Right. I'll stop here, and I suppose we'll move on to Jo now. But yeah, we'll take on some questions after that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Yeah, really comprehensive and great to get like a whistle-stop tour of everything that's available. Especially on the funding side, I think there are a lot of options out there. So definitely go and look into that. And as mentioned, there'll be sort of further information coming through on the slide decks later this week. Jo, over to you.
Hi, thanks very much, Adam and Valentin. First of all, I'm so glad this session's being recorded because I was scribbling away lots of notes there. Very, very interesting things that I can take back to our organisation and CEIS as well. And just a point as well, Adam, just about the storage side of things. We were over in Holland for the Social Enterprise World Forum last month, and it's just amazing to see how well set up they are for bikes, like multi-storey bike parks and at all the train stations. It was just it was really great to see that. So yes, I'm delighted to be here, and as Adam says, I'm Jo Seagrave at CEIS, and I'm here simply to share our experience of hiring some e-bikes from the Bike for Good switch-up bike service during the summer for a couple of months. We conducted a staff survey at May time, and we asked within that were there additional benefits that we could offer to staff that they would use that we didn't already have. And I'm afraid, Adam, we are one of those 63% that don't offer a cycle to work scheme currently. So we wanted to, our CEO is an avid cycler, and he had hired an e-bike from a switch-up bike service, and he wanted to bring a couple of bikes in for staff to have the opportunity to use them. So for anyone that isn't aware of the switch-up service, as Valentin mentioned, it's provided by Bike for Good, which is a social enterprise. So for us, that was a huge bonus because where possible, as a social enterprise ourselves, we always do aim to use third sector suppliers. And it was very timely that this scheme was being launched just as we were looking at, after we had done that survey and we're looking at e-bikes that we could bring into the organisation. It was such a simple service to use. We registered an account at switchupbikes.org.uk, and then you just go in, select the bike you want, whether it's pedal, electric, cargo, how long you want it for, when you want to collect it, and then just pay. We were looking to book for 2 months, and at the time you could only book for 1 month maximum through the online portal. So, but again, that wasn't a huge issue because there was the option to extend that at the end of the month. So that on a sort of rolling basis. So that was very easy and very good as well. For us, looking at that subscription, it was just such a cost-effective model. So not only did the hire include the bike itself, it included all the accessories, so your lock, your pump, and for us, using e-bikes, the battery as well. They have a maintenance service and 24-hour repairs. So especially with electric bikes, if you're out and about and something goes wrong, there's a fault, it was easy for us just to take it back into Bike for Good, who fixed that no problem for us. Another thing was the theft insurance was included as well. That's always a concern, particularly when it comes to e-bikes. And like you say, if there isn't any, suitable sort of facilities for locking your bike up or covering your bike up, then for us that was a bit of reassurance. And finally, for me especially, I don't know about anyone else, but the last time I conducted any road safety training, I was probably wearing a high-vis jacket in primary school. driving about or cycling around the playground. So for me, that is an area I was very nervous about, was getting onto the roads when we know how busy they are and you hear all the time about the accidents. So that was a really great sort of benefit for me included in that subscription. In terms of my experience in using the e-bike, first of all, in using the service, when we collected the bike, we hired two. Myself and my colleague Tommy went along. The staff there were brilliant. They gave us a full bike demonstration. With it being an e-bike, I'd never used one, so they showed you how to charge it, how to detach the battery, how to use the different settings. So going from the lowest setting of eco, which is 20% electric power and 80% pedal power, right up to turbo. So that was great that they did that, and it was all ready for us arriving and good to go afterwards. Using an electric bike for the first time, it was a bit daunting initially, but it was just so much fun. Using it and just the speed at which you can take off and that the bike can get up to was just quite exhilarating. Obviously, you do need to be careful, but it was really, really good and fun to use. In my previous experience, I'm not an avid cyclist. I'm not someone that does cycle to work. I'm 17 miles from our office, and it's like an hour and a half for me if I was to cycle to work versus 25 miles. I didn't feel so bad before this webinar because I do have an electric car, but now that you've made me aware that I do still have emissions, Adam, I may need to rethink that. We did have bikes previously which broke, and we donated to Bike for Good, and we never replaced them. We just felt it was an expense that we didn't want to put out, given that we weren't as keen cyclists. I do have a 7-year-old daughter, however, and she is quite keen on cycling. And a few years ago, I did sign up to a bike hire subscription service for her. I did at the time through COVID try to look at hiring myself a bike, but the bikes were limited for adults, and obviously through COVID they were very limited, and even the cost of looking to purchase a bike was very limiting as well. So that sort of prevented me through COVID. But I think having used the e-bike through work and having that experience now, we don't have great infrastructure. As I say, we don't have any bike hire services around us, but what we did do is we would put our daughter's bike into the back of the car and go into Glasgow Green and hire bikes there, and we would just go around the city with her, stop off at the museums. So for me, it was really great to just have the confidence to go and do that as well then. And again, hearing from Valentin, it's great to know that there are so many schemes out there for organisations to hire bikes, and not just the individuals themselves. So for me, that's, as I say, that's one of the things I've been scribbling away in. And I am keen to look at where else I might be able to hire a bike locally, because the switch up service was only available to Chi postcodes. So for those that are in Glasgow, and I'm in South Lanarkshire, so as an individual, I can't access that scheme, but I'm really keen and going to be looking into what schemes I can access. And I guess just to finish up, I would highly recommend to companies or individuals looking into cycle to work schemes to consider the bike hire option as well. As I say, given all the benefits and the things that are included within those packages, for me it's an attractive package. So yeah.
Amazing.
Me.
Thanks so much, Joe. I think there's a wealth of experience and kind of inspiration there, really. I think a few things that you mentioned there was, one, the smile on your face when you were just describing the electric bike the first time you had a ride on it, which I think is the key thing, really, is it can be quite daunting to sit down with a spreadsheet to look at the costs of an e-bike and all that, but just get people on them, and then that'll do the selling themselves, because it's that same thing of getting into anything that's fun. People will convert themselves a little bit, and then everything else will start to fall into place then, I think, which is the key thing, really. And also just confidence is a key thing that came up, and I think it's good to emphasize that e-bikes do help overcome that, a lot of that confidence as well, because it means that if you're coming away from the lights, even in traffic in a slightly poorly segregated cycle lane, you've got that power there to get you away. So e-bikes do help a lot with that confidence building as well. It's been a really good question, and it also links into something you said, Joe, earlier about kind of question about kind of campaigning for provision of public transport and cycle lanes, and Ian's put a great and very detailed question into chat, which is around, I'll try and summarize it, apologies Ian, this isn't to cut off anything you said, but you know, they've been campaigning for years for better options for commuting and green transport locally, including provide loads of documents and standards and engaging with the local kind of organizations that are needed. And there's been a bit of pushback there, but in terms of activating change, it's been difficult. And the summary question is, are there any strategies or suggestions you would promote? Because I know I mentioned before, kind of Get Glasgow Moving, who are doing some great work in Glasgow, which again isn't helpful if you're in South Lanarkshire, as you mentioned, Joe. So apologies for that. Just it's always difficult to try and recommend things on these things. And then Ian also mentions the better buses for Strathclyde has been suggested. I think there's a lot of different campaign groups out there, and it's very difficult to recommend them all. But I think the challenge I see with a lot of public engagement around this is that often it's quite complicated. And I think what we need to try and do with a lot of public transport or any sort of advocacy work at all is making it simple. So simple to get involved with, is like, what is one thing that you can share on social media, or one thing that you can engage with to say, I support this, I'm getting on board with this, rather than it requiring slightly lengthy kind of consultancy or engagement pieces, which sometimes these can do. Make it about gains. So how is that going to have impact on the individual? So rather than talking about public transport, talk about reducing traffic, because ultimately most people who are driving will care about traffic, and therefore if you can convince people that supporting a tram network or a bike lane or whatever is going to reduce traffic in their area, that's something they care about and are more likely to get involved with, is something we've found. And on that note, sort of that finding of common ground and going, actually, well, we both care about the same things. What is the Venn diagram of stuff that we can both build up from, rather than this feeling like an external force that sometimes come on that? And you know, what does everyone care about? There's a great book that I'm going to pop into the chat, just that you've maybe think of, called Saving Us by Catherine Hayhoe, which is a bit more about general climate stuff, but a really good example of how do we engage climate deniers to get them to take climate action, and how do you sort of meet people where they're at. And it's a really effective book there about doing that. So a really good question that I don't have a particularly concise answer to, but I do think public engagement on especially public transport is all about selling it in really simple ways that is about gains to their life, because too often I think it can get caught up in policy decision making frameworks and big PDFs that are 30 pages long that ultimately everyday people don't really care about. They're just trying to, you know, put dinner on the table. So let's try and meet them where they're at and engage on that. Ian, if you do want to pick up separately on that, I'd be more than happy to, because that is always really interesting to spar about that. What are your guys' thoughts on that, Joe and Valentin, around sort of public engagement, and based on the fact that some of those stats we saw, there was that sort of lack of widening, pressuring of other organisations?
Do you want to go, or am I good to go? I think it's really important to also reframe the debate not as a binary issue. So, you know, reading the question here, it is really interesting to see that, you know, of course, respondents will always, or very frequently highlight that active travel is not always suitable for the elderly, for those with additional support needs, and the young, and you know, to an extent that might be true, but equally, what is true is that the current transport system as we have it is not always suitable for the elderly, is not always suitable for people who can't drive, who can't afford to drive, and is not necessarily always suitable, and particularly not for the young. So I think it really is important to remember, well, to remind people, or at least to rephrase the debate not as a binary one. It's not either you're going to have, say, a cycle lane or not a cycle lane. It's the cycle lane is not going to take the whole roads, for example. So I mean, this is a very basic way of putting it, but I do believe that in transport, because it affects our lives so much, can become a bit of an emotive debate, and this is why change in transport is not necessarily easy to achieve, to be achieved, and particularly when you compare it to energy, for instance. But my view is that it's really important to emphasize the positive of cohabiting of having different modes of transport cohabiting rather than
I think
letting people believe that we're striving for having one single mode of transport.
I think that's it.
Wouldn't necessarily suit everyone.
It's not about the loss of access to the car, it's about the gain of less traffic type of thing as well, I think,
It's
is
about
it?
creating more opportunities, a wider range of options for people.
Just very quickly, I'm conscious of time. We've got 1 minute left, so sorry, Joe, for not having the chance there. But there's a question from Shona about, so as an employer, would I need to have enough available budget to be able to buy the bike that the employee then pays up out of their salary? So I think this is relating to the bike scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. There are several cycle to work scheme providers, Shona, and they will. I mean, all of them will operate in a slightly different way. Does that make sense? So some of them will actually, it's effectively buy the bike themselves, and you pay them back over time as you get the payments from the employees. And some schemes will require you to pay for the bike upfront, and then recoup the investment by taking off a portion of the employee's salary over either 12 months, 48 months, or 96.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. And I think, yeah, as mentioned, there'll be a lot of follow-up resources with more details on this coming through, because it feels like there's a lot going on at a national level as well as in local communities of really good schemes to get involved with, which is really positive. And I think there is support out there. There is that demand for this change. On that note, we are out of time, unfortunately. Any other quick thoughts before we wrap up from Joe and Valentin?
No, I think just what you said about that influencing, I think just regular people getting onto social media, sharing their experiences, trying to raise active travel amongst others, then yeah, as for me, that's a key thing.
Brilliant.
I think, yeah, particularly if you look at it from a campaigning perspective, I think it's making sure that the silent majority is not as silent as it currently is.
Yeah.
As well, I think that's a really important point. But I totally agree with you. Making sure that making sure that we are able to portray everyday people doing everyday things. It's just that they're doing it slightly differently than what they used to do before. I think
that's it. Let's go out and motivate and mobilize the silent majority. I think that's the key thing. Brilliant. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
And see you in January.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Cheers.